I want to talk a little bit about the event life cycle. Let's just assume for a minute you're doing a corporate Christmas party. Boss says to his executive assistant, it's time to start planning our company Christmas party. So right there, that is the conception of the event. That's when the event is conceived. And then right away, the executive assistant goes into action. Maybe the boss has some thoughts and ideas. Maybe the ladies in the lunchroom, gather around the water cooler and they want to have input. Maybe the executive assistant already has a file and can go right to the file and deploy all of the usual vendors and providers, and it's done. But usually there is a moment this would be called pre-planning. So pre-planning is everything that takes place prior to engaging providers, vendors, other producers, other components and elements that go into an event. So you're going to have the pre-planning. Generally, it may last anywhere from a few minutes to a few weeks or a few months. So it's really a time where concepts are formulated, general thoughts and ideas, the things that go into an event before anyone else really even knows about it. Maybe the conception of the event is in the boss's mind, and maybe he's mowing it over in his head, and he's never said anything to anybody. Maybe he's only discussed it with his wife. That begins the pre-planning process. The next phase in the event life cycle is the planning stage. So not to bore you with any details, but the planning stage is where you begin to cultivate the vibe dimension. That's going to be a whole nother layer in your event. The vibe dimension incorporates sound. What kind of sounds are you going to have in the event? Is there going to be a band? Is there going to be a DJ? Is there going to be a soundtrack? Is there going to be an announcement? Is there a speech? Are there going to be toasts? So all things sound would be one of the elements in the vibe dimension. Another element of the vibe dimension recipe is going to be lighting. Lighting, front lighting, back lighting, mood lighting, accent lighting, architectural lighting, fill lighting, sometimes the absence of lighting. Maybe you want some components of darkness and shadows. All of the lighting components are things to be considered when you are creating and developing the vibe dimension. Another component of the vibe dimension is really something you want to consider that's often overlooked, and that is the air. So the air is something that you want to work with your facility. You're going to want to work with the other providers. Are you trucking in air conditioning? Are you having an outdoor event? What is the weather going to be like on that day? How do you want your guests to perceive the vibe of the event? Is it indoor? Is it outdoor? The air is something that you want to take into consideration, which includes the weather, by the way. It includes the air conditioning. Is there going to be a fireplace with heat coming off? Or is it just going to be a visual lighted fireplace? So air is something to keep in mind. So then the next thing you might want to incorporate is an ingredient in the vibe dimension is music. Almost every event has some form of music during the event. Is it the walk-up music for the speaker? Of course there's music if it's a sporting event. Music, is it going to be a DJ? Again, are you going to have a band? Are there going to be background smooth jazz in the background? Is there going to be music playing across the festival? Are there multiple stages of music? So you want to keep in mind there's going to be music. So check it out. Sound, lights, air, music, slam dunk. It's going to be, think of slam when you think of the vibe dimension. But there's also another component of the vibe dimension, and that really has more to do with the floor plan and the timeline. So that's really where your set design and your mini script. So you have slam, but then you also have another part which is, I'll call it SMAC. And so in the vibe dimension, SMAC has to do with S for set design. I don't know, set design, how we write it there, set design. M is for mini script. By the way, going back to set design, that might be the floor plan where the tables and chairs are around a dance floor with a staircase as a backdrop. Maybe you've got pipe and drape, or maybe the set design has something to do with where the Ferris wheel is or where the hot dog stand is. And set design could be all of the different, maybe it's pieces of furniture, or maybe it's particular vendors that are set up at the festival or the rodeo, or maybe set design includes some of the crowd control devices at the rocket launch that you're putting together, or set design certainly would include the red carpet for a red carpet event. So set design includes those kinds of elements for sure. Mini script. So mini script is going to be your timeline, whether it is a timeline from the conception of the event all the way forward through into where you see the memory of the event and the memory boosters in order to reach legendary status. You may build into your mini script the components in the timeline that happen after the event is actually over. So keep that in mind as a part of your mini script. Maybe the mini script is more of a macro script, so you can have both, and both can be true at the same time. So the next part of SMAC is the audience. So there's on stage and there's off stage. And really what you want to aim for is you want to have an event that will go down in history and reach legendary status, not just from the invited guests and the attendees, but also the cast and crew. That might be waiters, wait staff, that might be employees of the different vendors, that might be part of the setup or teardown crew, it might be your audio-visual team, anybody that is present who can say later, I was there. That's the audience. So you want to have a legendary event that no one will ever forget if it's going to reach legendary status, and that includes your audience. And then C is the cast and crew. And again, the cast and crew can also be part of the audience. The cast and crew, who are the cast and crew? So if it's a wedding, the star of the show most of the time is the bride or the bride and groom. They're part of the cast. So they often, almost always, need to be in the loop on the macro and mini. They also need to be in the loop on certain key elements of the timeline. Often it's not the entire timeline, but they need to know the major touch points of the timeline in the mini script. Also, if it's a wedding, the wedding party is often a part of the cast. Sometimes there are certain members of the wedding party that are simply part of the audience, not necessarily a part of the cast. So keep that in mind. So I don't want to go too deep into it, but cast and crew are the C in the SMAC. So you've got slam, sound, lights, air, music. Then you've got SMAC, which is set design, mini script, audience, cast and crew. And then I want to also point out, like one of those Batman fight scenes where they have the starbursts. There's fab. And what is fab? Food and beverage. Food and beverage. So when we're talking about the life cycle of an event, you've got the conception of the event, you've got the pre-planning, you've got the vibe dimension, which is really the planning phase, and we're leading up to the actual event. And then the memory and the echoes of the event are after the fact. So what you wind up with in the life cycle of the event is the conception of the event, really the pre-planning section. Then you have the planning section, which is the vibe dimension. By the way, just so we're clear, this is time. This is time going by. And then you have your actual event. Go ahead and build in the vibe dimension in play. And then after the event, you have the echoes and the memories of the event, years, decades, generations, legendary status, noise angle, memory slope. This is, I like to say, the new sensory plane right here. This is going to be your energy axis. Then you're going to have your story arc. Then there's your subplot, and I know this is a lot of, there's the vibe dimension, we'll put a V for vibe dimension. So in the life cycle of the event, when you're planning, what you want to do is you want to keep in mind the end game, which is the memory, the legendary status. So when you take that end game and you work backwards, back through the vibe dimension, into the event, back through the new sensory, the planning, the pre-planning, and you can work backwards basically reverse engineer what you're trying to accomplish, which is a legendary event. You can work backwards. And all the while, as an event producer, you know you are working with usually you're working with a client, or you're working with a boss, you're working for somebody and trying to accomplish this event. So if you're doing an event, say for a corporate Christmas party, again, I'll use that easy reference, you are going to basically, from the time of the conception of the event all the way through to basically the end of the event, you are going to work with the client from the conception of the event through the end of the event. And what you're going to find is, over time in the planning process, the client involvement is going to more than likely start very heavy and then decline client involvement. And that has an inverse relationship with the planning of the event. So this is the preparedness line. So you're not very prepared at the beginning, client's very involved, and over time, let's just say client involvement. Nope, that's not client involvement, that's preparedness. So what happens is you think of the 5 P's. Previous preparation prevents poor performance. So increasingly, you are more and more prepared. You're not fully prepared before the event. You can only be so prepared because of another component in the subplot ingredients for the event, planned or unplanned drama avatars, which we'll talk about in another video. But previous preparation prevents poor performance, so your preparedness goes up, client involvement goes down. One thing you want to remember to do for a memorable event is, as you're planning, you want to make sure that you explain or have the client understand these elements in the event are going to be kept secret. You don't want to let all the air out of the balloon, because attendees and members of the cast and crew sometimes even don't need to be fully in the loop on what's going to take place in the event. Some elements of surprise, if you will, so that they don't have any preconceived notion as they're going through the new sensory plane into the vibe dimension. You want to make sure that it's all fresh and they're seeing things with no preconceived notion going into the event. You might say, we're going to have a water wall, and when they get there, it's underwhelming because the water wall is teeny tiny, a little plastic model. You don't want to just plant any ideas into the attendees' minds. You want them to be surprised. So keep that in mind as you are working with the client. Make the client realize and understand they need to keep things under wraps as much as possible without sharing. Unless the big draw is that Oprah Winfrey is going to be there and that's how you're getting people to the event. But you can still keep some elements of surprise, you know, as Oprah says, unexpectedly to the guests in the audience. Out of the blue, you get a new car, and you get a new car, and you get a new car. So you want to have some surprise elements in there and make sure that the client and some of the cast and crew members involved don't reveal the surprise before it's time. So those are some elements of the event life cycle that I wanted to share going into the planning process for how to produce epic events that will go down in history.